Welcome to this week's episode of Surgeon Interrupted. Today's episode is brought to you by the Hippocratic Collective. Check out all our shows and content at hippocratic-collective.com. We are joined by guest Sonia Lee, a Detroit native. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Frances May Hardin.
Oh my gosh. Please just call me Frances May. And it's been such a privilege to connect with you. You know, we've already had the chance to chat some, but I would love to introduce you to our audience so that everyone can hear about what a prolific background you have.
Oh, that is so kind. Well, I'm honored to be here, and I have a lot to share.
Incredible. Well, Sonia, she is a graduate of the Juilliard School, as well as accomplished, prolific concert violinist. And her works are just really too numerous to name, and they're too impressive for me to fit onto really even one slide. But she made her debut at the Buffalo Philharmonic while still a high schooler. And that was before she started her studies at the Juilliard School. While she was still an undergraduate, she won an audition with the Toronto Symphony and then was promoted to principal second violinist the following year. She's also been a concerto soloist with the New York Chamber Orchestra, the Toronto Symphony, the Saginaw Bay Symphony, and Grosse Pointe Symphony. Are those pronunciations correct? Oh, okay. What an impressive CV. And as you guys know, coming from my background, it is a totally new world and new set of vocabulary, but it is such an honor to be joined by truly like a child prodigy in the concert violin world.
Thank you so much. I am humbled by that term, child prodigy, but I think that luck is truly the residue of design. And I think going back from when I was a child, I knew that I wanted to design my future in the arts over science, just simply because I grew up with parents who had wanted me out of obligation to nurture a surgeon.
Your father was a surgeon, right? Now retired?
Yes, he is now officially retired from general surgery. Yes.
Okay, general surgery. I was going to ask what type. So yes, you were brought up in a household where when you and your parents came to America and your dad practiced general surgery, it sounds like there was an ask or an expectation that you would also become a surgeon. Is that fair?
That is fair. I think that a lot of us from his medical school class, graduating medical school class in South Korea, they all had children that were solely devoted to the sciences, but I should also say the arts. So we all had to be those outliers in our classes. Everybody played at least 3 or 4 instruments, had weekly lessons, but then did, Kaplan studies and ACT prep, SAT prep, the whole 9 yards. But I furtively but wholeheartedly practiced, I would say, a few more hours than the rest of them.
Oh my gosh. And do you feel like you were practicing because of your true love for the arts and for classical music, or was even part of the impetus, the journey away from the sciences? Like, oh, I'm going to put some distance between me and the sciences. I not like rebuke the STEM education, but I can see that I'm drawn elsewhere. And because you had to prove your commitment to that you really put some distance between yourself and the sciences.
Absolutely. I do remember one of our Suzuki touring groups in Buffalo, New York, where I grew up, went to a nursing home and a hospital before we went to Carnegie Hall. And after playing my program, I was so touched by the patients who were in recovery. And I noticed that the inimitable joy that these patients had really healed them. And I wanted to explore that further, but also in a musical way. So I did create that distance by doing everything that I could to babysit my neighbors' kids, who are all dermatologist kids. And so they would gladly have me teach their kids violin lessons and piano lessons. And then I would use that funding to pay for my Juilliard pre-college education on the weekends, on Saturdays.
I think that in terms of helping people to understand where you came from and kind of the decision making that you had to go through to come into your art and your career, what stands out to me is that a through line for all of it is your commitment to excellence. And I think that that's so interesting because, of course, like, yes, your father was a surgeon, your family had high standards for you, 100% understand. And what's interesting is you never let up on the standards for excellence. You just took them into a totally new field. and took off from there. I mean, how do you view that?
I view that with a sense of compassion for myself. It was okay that I maybe didn't get the 4.5 GPA in AP bio, and some of the kids in my class were going to university settings for advanced organic chemistry, even while in high school. But I was like, great, that is incredible for you. And they would say, well, what are you doing on the weekends? And I would say, well, I'm practicing my violin in New York City and gearing towards a career in music and the arts. And every summer we had fellowships
Hmm.
in the arts. So I would go to Aspen or Taos, New
Hmm.
Mexico. And it was just a really interesting group of talented individuals that were super focused on their craft.
Yeah, I absolutely respect the level of commitment. You alluded to, though, like at the time when you were very young and you were a student, when you weren't necessarily killing it in organic chemistry and topics like that, were you
Yes.
hard on yourself about it? Or is that something, even at the time, you kind of knew this is okay? This is not where I'm going to pour all my resources? Or did the compassion come in hindsight?
It came in both ways. I would say in hindsight, I can forgive myself for not getting the top ranking. But at the time, it was really tricky because there was also this sense of disillusionment in going into medicine because I could see behind the scenes. I'll never forget watching my father perform surgical procedure. I would say your audiences probably know if somebody is late to the operating room,
Mm-hmm.
there was a lot of tension. And that
Mm-hmm.
was, I would say there's a lot of parallels between my father being like a conductor and telling the orchestra, you can't be late on this one beat. So I would look back and say that organic chemistry was sort of my nemesis in my high school. There were a lot of gifted chemists and science
Mm-hmm.
related students. So I would say at the time I felt a little bit of a conundrum because I wanted to forgive myself for practicing 5 more hours on the violin and piano rather than studying for that exam.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the sooner and more effectively that all of us as adults can get to this place of compassion for our
Yes.
younger selves, I think all the better. It's incredibly important. I would love to hear more about, you talked about babysitting a little bit, but you worked, you saved money, and how did you get into like Juilliard pre-education? How does one go about that?
That's an excellent question. So, one of my inspiring mentors in music was Leonard Bernstein.
Mm-hmm.
He had been conducting the Boston Symphony one summer when Midori was playing with the Boston Symphony, his composition at Tanglewood in the Berkshires. And I was working towards the Juilliard pre-college audition, and
Mm-hmm.
she said, "Oh, once you start, it's really, really intense." But I thought nothing is going to be that difficult of a challenge when it comes to classical music compared to becoming a surgeon. So I channeled that energy. And in rehearsal, I can send a photo of Leonard Bernstein conducting me. He said to me, don't even think about going into medicine, Sonia. You have what it takes to go to Juilliard. So that was the seed that was planted. And Frances May, as God is my witness, I said to myself, this is my path. I know from now on that I want to follow in the footsteps of Midori. And she was actually on the Johnny Carson show at the time. And she had broken two E strings during the Boston Symphony concert. It was a very muggy and humid night in
Mm-hmm.
the Berkshires where the Boston Symphony was playing, and she broke two E strings but kept going. So I thought, my goodness, that's like a scalpel breaking in the middle of surgery, but you just, you know, are resilient and you continue the surgery. So I thought to myself, I'm going to do this. And Leonard Bernstein said, don't be a cog in the wheel, Sonia. If you have the dream, you deserve to go to pre-college. So he also encouraged me to talk to my parents about it. And of course, they said, oh, it's an excellent extracurricular for you
Mm-hmm.
to go to Harvard or Columbia, or have that as an extra talent on your
Hmm.
artistic supplementary video. But I was adamant about going exclusively for music training and classical music violin performance.
And what was your schedule like? Because my
Yes,
understanding is that that was long distance from for you. So you had a commute. Can you describe how that was?
absolutely. So I looked forward to waking up Saturdays at 4 a.m. And this is before I could drive with my license. So my mom would drop me off at the Greater Buffalo airport and I would get on the plane. At that time, there was US Express, and I would have just enough to pay for the round trip going into LaGuardia, taking public transit, and I was just following my bliss. I was so happy. And oftentimes I would get to Juilliard before people who lived 2 blocks away. So I knew that
Wow.
it was my path. And the
Hmm.
conductor eventually noticed and said, "You're here early and you're flying in. That's really a lot of work, but I can see that you're passionate about it." And
Yeah.
that was my thing.
And like when you even refer to those days, again, you're so young at the time when your classmates are acing these organic chemistry types of things, and you mentioned spending 5 extra hours towards violin, that day. It's like, what was a normal amount of practicing per day for you? Like the reason I ask, just so you know my thought process is like,
Yes.
I think that it is so easy. Certainly you sit here today and you make it look easy, and when you talk about it like it was no big thing. But
Yes.
it's so important for like the next generation to really hear, I think, speaking for myself, all of the actual hours and sweat and grit and tenacity that goes into it.
Absolutely. For me, it was not work. I would come home from school around 2:30, and instead of doing field hockey or lacrosse, they let me choose orchestra. And our high school was special in that if you had some AP courses already met, which I completely finished after freshman year, I could go home earlier, practice from about 2:30 to about 9 p.m. And then I would just go over my notes for other AP classes. Like AP English was great, and all these other classes
Hmm.
were a little bit more challenging. So Monday through Friday, I would go to regular high school, and then on Saturday mornings, I would spend all day at pre-college Juilliard, and
Hmm.
that still exists today. In fact, there are a lot of amazing students there all day on Saturday. They have orchestra ear training, and they have chamber music, and a lot of these kids go on to become the next classical music stars. It's hard to explain, but they have that same schedule and that same resilience. I also
Wow.
had a best friend who lived in Scarsdale, and I would stay over, and then I would rehearse at Carnegie Hall with the New York Youth Symphony from 12 to 5. And then I would fly home, do homework on the plane. And I thought, this is my outlet. I'm following my bliss. And every babysitting opportunity translated to following that dream.
That's just incredible. At what age do you feel like you really knew that it was going to be music for you?
Uh, when I was 16, there was a very special program at Carnegie Hall, and you play at midnight, the New York String Seminar, and I was chosen for that. So I went and played
Yeah.
on the same stage as a lot of these other gifted kids, and some of them were college students already. And I just knew that that was the moment. And being able to share that gift at midnight at Carnegie Hall at age 16 was, I think, one of the pivotal moments. It was the epiphanal moment.
Oh, I love that. And it's so interesting. Like, I personally, I'm the first doctor in my family, so I didn't have a lot of context for it. That's also why, honestly, like a lot that occurred in the hospital and during my career took me by surprise, genuine surprise, because I
Yes.
didn't really have people within the family or loved ones warning me. But the reason that I ask this is just because I'll share from my standpoint, even though I left my career as a surgeon 2 months ago, 2+ months ago, I am having this problem assimilating. Like it's definitely a journey re entering society not as a practicing operating surgeon. And it's this interesting thing where a famous saying people use it all the time in medical training is, how you do anything is how you do everything. I very much identify with that. Like, especially, I mean, to the nth degree in my residency, that's
Yes.
where I lost a lot of ability to like live in the gray area or understand nuance. But
Yes.
it's still hard because I'm working in another industry. I think my husband, my friends would refer to this though as like, I'm still acting like a surgeon. I'm just being a surgeon and having the surgeon's mentality in
Yes.
like a different industry. That's like honestly the difference, right?
Right. And that is so relatable as a violinist. I could honestly say that there are a lot of um, musicians from Juilliard who then took the path of medicine. And they say that pianists and violinists have that similarity of being a surgeon because they're so precision oriented. If you miss a note, everybody notices in a concert
Mm-hmm.
or even a setting such as a chamber music recital. So there
Mm-hmm.
is that surgical precision that happens in an audition per se. One of my experiences trying out for the Toronto Symphony was behind the screen.
Mm-hmm.
And when they took the screen away, they thought I was going to be male because they didn't expect a female to play the way that I played, because I played with a lot of heart and a lot of, I would say, meat and potatoes is what
Hmm.
one of the comments was. And they thought I was a male. But I was well trained by a lot of coaches who said behind the screen, you just have to imagine yourself playing for the composer. So that was one thing that I think gave me a competitive edge at that young age, at 21, when I won the job.
Wow. Yeah. No, that's what I was going to ask. So for this huge audition that was done blind, you're 21 years old. They were shocked that you were a woman, but were they shocked also by your age, that you were a young woman?
Yes, they were.
I love your life story, your stories about your father and his work as a surgeon. They are all so compelling to me. I think that one thing specifically that stood out was that he told you at the later college stage of life, if you don't get a job right out of Juilliard, you will have to go to medical school.
Yes, I recall that conversation over dinner. And I immediately started doing research. I went to the University of Buffalo Library and I started learning how to pivot. And I knew that if I tried out as a junior, my third year at Juilliard, that I would fail incredibly. So I knew that I had to have the experience of not getting past a first round of an international audition behind a screen so that I could work harder to make that happen by the time I got my degree. My dream was to go to get my master's and my doctorate and maybe think about public health with music, but I didn't have that opportunity. So I immediately said to myself, how are you going to win this lottery, this magnitude of a mountain in front of you? And
Mm-hmm.
I started writing a resume and I submitted it, didn't get past the first round, was completely humiliated. But I said, this is good. Now I know what to do and I have a year to do it. So I
Mm-hmm.
started building my team and I started doing a lot of research on people that had won unanimously after the second round. I started,
Is that publicly available information?
um, I knew people that had done so well that the jury, it's like the scene in Ratatouille where the food critic, who's really harsh,
Yeah.
just says, oh, compliments to the chef and doesn't know that it's a rat who's cooked the ratatouille, and then knows that this is something that reminded him of his childhood. So
Yeah.
I thought to myself, if all the judges put all their pens down and their critical thinking caps down and enjoy hearing me play, then I have a chance. So I started campaigning to build a team. Um, and I started asking for phone cards for birthday and Christmas gifts and holiday gifts. And I started calling every concert master in America, who happened to be all male at the time. So I asked them how they won their auditions, and they told me. They said, you have to start making flashcards, kind of like Anki cards,
Mm-hmm.
and start memorizing the excerpts. And there are about 25 symphonies
Mm-hmm.
that I had to memorize and also play at the drop of a hat. So I created this paper bag and every day would randomly pick an excerpt like Beethoven,
Hmm.
Symphony Number 9, Adagio, or Don Juan by Strauss. And then I started making sure that every time I played for somebody that made me nervous, vis-a-vis my practice room floor at Juilliard, there were a lot of outliers there. They would say, "Oh, this note's out of tune. That's not going to cut it." So they kind of helped me. They were sort of my string audition committee collective at Juilliard. And the one thing that really was magical was on the day that I took the Greyhound bus from Juilliard, New York City to Toronto, the customs officials were just great. They said, "Oh, you're carrying a violin. You must be taking
Hmm.
the audition again." And I said, "Yes." And they said, "Okay, good luck." And this year, I said, if all the lights are green, proverbially green, like the customs officials and everybody at the hall, I had a good chance. And I remember thinking, this is it. This is my chance. And I guess it's kind of like getting a perfect score on the step two or, getting the perfect residency. Uh, but I just knew that something was different this time because I was really well prepared. And after the second round, I signed my contract.
That's just incredible. I
It was,
really, it's like winning the lottery, though,
it
like you
was for
said.
me. Yes, I was really, really touched by the committee because they said, "We know that you had also, as a youngster, played in the Toronto Symphony Youth Orchestra, and we know you have family members in Canada, so we welcome you back to Canada and hope you stay." But then I met my husband 6 seasons later and moved back to Michigan and moved back to the States, I should say. But the experience taught me that passion matters and what you really have in your heart. You just have to listen to your inner voice. And I knew that failure does not really dictate me, but resilience and finding your voice really does bring success.
Just incredible. I really, I find that so inspirational. I can think of two different quotes immediately that come to mind,
Yes.
from your story and your wisdom that you're sharing. The first one is the Stoic quote, I think Cato, but we cannot ensure success, but we can deserve it.
Yes.
And then the other one I love, this is just going to be like badly paraphrased, but I don't know, was it Roosevelt or someone who was like, I find, the harder I work, the luckier I get.
That's exactly the quote that was in my violin case, to be honest. I loved just the historical, beneficial inspiration that a lot of people had. Sometimes for me, it was that, but also the loved ones around me. And yes, finally, after I won the job, I think my dad said, "What about getting a title?" And so that's what made me try out for the principal position the following season. And it was a lot of work. And there's like another book attached to that chapter, just because, being a young 23-year-old female amongst 50-year-old men who were sort of deciding on your tenure, it was a lot of work. But at the same time, I was up for that challenge. There were a lot of, I would say, old school philosophies at Juilliard. Once I got to Juilliard, I mean, there was a whole nother host of people that demanded so much out of, I would say they were harder on the freshmen and sophomores.
Hmm.
One such professor would often just treat me with a lot more, I would say, he really instilled in me the tenacity of never ever backing down. Like if you're sitting concertmaster of the Juilliard Symphony, you really have to deliver and be ready. So the first rehearsal, I was wondering why nobody was sitting first chair, and I sat down, and he said, "Did you memorize the solo?" And I said, "Well, I wasn't aware that we had a solo." And he goes, "Well, it's amazing that civilization has come this far without prep." And so I remember going over to my roommate's, desk and saying, "I need you to hold this chopstick and I have to memorize this for the rest of the evening." And I came back the next day and had it memorized. And after that, he said, "Okay, I'm choosing 5 fellows to go to Iceland to teach." in Reykjavik. And I said, oh no, please, it's okay. You don't have to choose me. And he goes, no, I'm going to choose you because you stayed up all night and memorized the solo. But that led to a lot of intense work, which prepared me later for the Toronto Symphony, I would say. But
That is just, oh my gosh. I don't know why I'm so moved by it. I guess I feel like it's very moving to me personally because, you know, you mentioned in our earlier conversation that I know that you meant this in a nice way,
yes,
but we we've had some similar experiences where we can relate in terms of like choosing a path other than surgery when surgery was one of the potential prescribed paths.
yes.
But you said where you're at is where I was at 11, which
Well,
I love it. And point well taken. Absolutely. Point well taken. But it's funny because you sorted through a lot of this. You had better executive function at 11 and like kind of sorted through all this, and your career is just like incredibly inspirational. I want to go there in terms of already, even in these few months, what I find is that when I'm moving into like the careers and industries that are a better fit for me,
yes.
opportunities genuinely do come. And they come more easily. I guess I just kind of feel like I fought tooth and nail to be in a job that like did not see me and was not the right fit. But I tried to make it work for 13 years.
I understand. I think I had sort of a more human interaction with my family members, in particular, my father. I love him dearly, but there was a strict code of ethics, but also high achievement. And I would say that I can relate so well to any surgeon or their progeny. I have a group called Lumino, and we all have fathers who are physicians. And I didn't even realize that until one time we were recording at the University of Michigan, and they shared that their father was in the ER and the other father was an
Wow.
anesthesiologist in Santa Barbara. And I said, "Oh, my dad's a general surgeon." They said, "Well, that makes sense because you're surgically precise in your intonation and your articulation and the way that you show up." I mean, to this day, Frances May, I show up early. It's a running
Mm-hmm.
joke. I asked my husband, how would you describe me? And he said, well, you make the impossible possible and you show up early. And I said, well, that's nice of you to say, but yes, it's still um, apropos to my personality. But I'm so happy for you that you made this incredible, pivotal, and wonderful decision. It makes every day blissful, and you're following your indomitable spirit, which is something that I had to discover at that young age, that I did not want to necessarily go that route. But at the same time, there's a part of me that wishes that I could have been in your shoes as well, to have gone to medical school and had the path that you had, just because I think that in my next life, I would have enjoyed helping people and genuinely becoming a physician to serve others.
Absolutely. It's incredibly important work. It's very meaningful. The last thing I want to touch on is
Yes.
we've both talked a little bit about like our family, the cultures that we were brought up in. And a quote that I really love, it helped me a lot, and I see it here because we just have this same really gritty, just tough, unrelenting approach, right? To whatever it is that we do. I'm sure you would apply it to your next projects. I'm going to take it everywhere with me. I don't know how to separate myself from like that approach to life and
Yes.
work. But the quote basically said, yes, we talk about like generational curses, but you also have to consider your generational strengths.
Yes. This is a pivotal moment for a lot of us to understand, especially, just hearing about people like Melinda Gates and her cause of really elevating women and their causes and being able to see that we all have gifts. And sometimes it's not just being a violinist or a surgeon, but it's being a human with that indomitable spirit of giving to others and also teaching others how to really follow your path and that passionate path which you are embarking on now. And it is so inspiring. I mean, it definitely caught my attention, and I am so blessed and honored to be here.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so, so much. It's been such a joy to speak with you today.
Thank you. Likewise.
Follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Frances May MD. Check out our website, hippocratic-collective.com, for more shows and content like this. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Surgeon Interrupted. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a review. And don't forget, there is so much opportunity out there for those who actually follow their hearts.